Hello, I am a teacher educator. In this 15-minute talk, I advance Duckworth's critical exploration in the classroom as a theoretically grounded pedagogy for the progressively minded teacher educator. Critical exploration in the classroom responds to the call to develop a pedagogy of teacher education while addressing identified challenges in the field. The paper from which this talk is taken is included in a collection of essays published this spring under the title In Search of Wonderful Ideas, Critical Exploration in Teacher Education. The Stanford researcher Pamela Grossman observed there's a dearth of theory in the instructional practices used in teacher preparation programs. She and others, such as John Loughran, have called for a pedagogy of teacher education. While the term pedagogy is oftentimes used as a synonym for teaching and oftentimes a catch-all phrase for such things as procedures, teaching, practice, instruction, and so on, pedagogy, as I am using the term, refers to the art and science of educating children, focusing on the relationship between learning and teaching such that one does not exist as separate and distinct from the other. Some pedagogical challenges in teacher education. When teaching about teaching, teacher educators encounter certain challenges. The first of which is the prevalence among students of teaching of the transmission view of teaching and learning. The second is the goal of developing in these students a conception of teaching and learning that reflects what we know to be true about how people learn for understanding. The third, of course, is to teach ourselves in a way that reflects authentic teaching, the kind of teaching we'd like to see them enact in the K-12 classroom. Fourth challenge for us is to build in complex and authentic learning experiences so that our students learn about practice in practice and in which they see the promise and potential within all students to raise questions, have ideas, and make insights about the world that are of significance. As can be seen here, John Loughran views teacher education, in fact claims it should be the crucible of sustained inquiry in which the practice of teaching and learning is a source of sustained inquiry and development. It's through this practice, he says, that students might be encouraged to grow beyond the technical into independent, autonomous, and sophisticated professional pedagogues primed to teach for understanding. So, as we know, Piaget's research illuminated the origins and structure of children's thought and what is often referred to as the stage theory of cognitive development. His colleagues Barbel Inholder, Hermine Sinclair, and Margalie Beauvais sought to explore what they presented as one of the unsolved problems of developmental psychology. Little is known, they stated, about the mechanisms of transition from one major stage to the next and the passage between two successive substages. They concluded, in order to account for the transition mechanisms, structural and dynamic models have to be combined. So they propose learning studies to study the dynamic processes of learning through the observation of cognitive construction when it takes place in conditions that, within the limits of what we can do, provide the child with optimal possibilities of interaction with the environment. And they published this work in the 1974 book, Learning and the Development of Cognition. So they sought, in fact, to explore Piaget's interactionist position that internal cognitive construction does not result from maturation alone, but is or can be initiated through interaction with external environmental stimuli. And they selected critical exploration as the method to pursue this research, as they found it the most suitable to investigate the phenomenon. It gives the researcher flexibility in talking and in interacting with the child or the adolescent who's conducting the learning study, contrary to the behaviorist view or the experimental view. As many of us know here, the research did generate evidence in support of Piaget's interactionist position, a finding that they concluded, and Piaget concluded, is of theoretical and practical importance, particularly for education. And it's this aspect of critical exploration that makes the methodology particularly useful for teaching in classrooms. It is, we argue, I argue, the researchers argue, an application of developmental psychology in the field of education. Duckworth is a former student of Piaget, and in Geneva, working as a research assistant, she sat alongside Inhelder as Inhelder conducted learning studies using critical exploration methodology to follow the learning of children and adolescents. At Harvard, teaching students at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Duckworth reinvented or brought to life the critical exploration methodology for use in classroom settings, K through 12 classroom settings. In the courses she teaches, rather than having students read about Piaget then, she puts her students in the role of a learning researcher and gives them a series of learning studies assignments. Much of her work is contained in her early book, The Having of Wonderful Ideas. Duckworth, in the Genevan tradition, does not give her students a specific script or protocol to follow. Instead, she relies on and builds on students' own resourcefulness, nurturing their inventiveness and their innovative and creative capacities. She does, however, very firm about cautioning students not to direct learning, not to tell learners what they know, as this would detract from the real task at hand, which is to research what the learners themselves are learning, what is on their mind, what they are thinking about, what is capturing their attention. Instead, they're to assume a research stance and to see where the learning does go. They're to put their own knowledge and understanding, as I said, in the service of understanding the particular challenges that the learners are working on, what they're seeing, what they're making of the situations that are being presented to them. Students are to follow and describe the learner's thoughts as those thoughts evolve with and through their interactions with the phenomena at hand and with the thoughts of other explorers who are engaged in the task. Students notice, as I did myself, that the activity of exploring learners' understanding proves helpful to the learners in sustaining their own thinking, their own learning. That is, research, the act of researching, teaching and learning are not separate and distinct one from the other, but come together as a pedagogy, as meaningful practice. In a chapter concerned with the nature of teacher training, Piaget noted that he was impressed by preparation programs in which teachers learn how to record facts, how to question children, since it forces them to understand the complexity of the questions involved. In fact, asking the right question of learners is a very challenging task, quite different from telling people what we know. Engaging teachers in experiences of this nature, he explained, provides opportunities for theoretical exploration and technical improvements, meaning that as teachers engage in this work, they too come to contribute and become co-creators about what we know about children's learning. Piaget recognized a connection between making inquiry into children's learning and a part of teacher education and elevating the status of teaching from that of craft or trade to that of a profession. He wrote, "In a word, it is by and through research that the teacher's profession ceases to be merely a trade or vocation to acquire the dignity of all professions that draw upon both the arts and sciences, since the sciences concerned with children and their education constitute an inexhaustible field of endeavor, now more than ever." It held true in 1969 when Piaget published this work, and it's more so today. With Piaget, Vermont educator John Dewey also called for active methods and put high value on more active, expressive, and self-directing factors, all of which are necessities of the larger social evolution. "Through active methods," said Dewey, "learning is put into circulation. Knowledge is no longer an immobile solid, it has been liquefied. It is actively moving in all currents of society." So in other words, through active learning, students we all have access to knowledge. When knowledge isn't contained, originates in our actions in the world, the view that Piaget, of course, brought us to, knowledge is democratized, is what many would say. So that is, Dewey valued active methods, not so much for the vocational aspect, learning a trade, but for their potential for human liberation. Dewey and Piaget are united in the project transformation and the role of active methods in learning. Piaget's concern involved the development of or the freeing of the mind. Dewey's concern lay in the transformation of social structures. Both saw curriculum and instruction as having potential to either hinder or support development and transformation. To this end, teacher education is critical. In closing, Duckworth's critical exploration in the classroom is then a transformative pedagogy, a pedagogy for change in helping education achieve its larger purpose and the promise and hope of schools as vehicles of social progress and human liberation, with teachers as facilitators of growth, learning, and development. Thank you, and I thank you for listening.